The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Gloria tibi Domine. Jesus said to his disciples, "Gird your loins and light your lamps, and be like servants who await their master's return from a wedding, ready to open immediately when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds vigilant on his arrival. Amen, I say to you, he will gird himself. Have the servants recline at table and proceed to wait on them. And should he come in the second or third watch and find them prepared in this way, blessed are those servants. Be sure of this. If the master of the house had known the hour when the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be prepared, for at an hour you do not expect, the Son of Man will come." The Gospel of the Lord. I think we've all known somebody to go through some sort of big trial or tribulation in their life. And sometimes when we really don't know what to say or how to respond, we look to say something that is true, but sometimes we don't necessarily say it in the right way or mean it in the way that we ought to. And one of these phrases is, you have to have faith. You just got to have faith to be able to endure whatever tribulation that is at hand. And of course, we say that from a really good part in our hearts. We actually want them to get better or to overcome this cross in their life. And we tell them, you just have to have faith. But in reality, it is so much more than just having faith. And sometimes we don't actually mean faith. What we really mean is, maybe God will bestow some magic upon you. And in reality, that's not the case. In the second reading from the letter to the Hebrews, we are given a formal definition of faith. Faith is the realization of what is hoped for and evidence of the things not seen. Faith is not magic, though sometimes there is a real temptation to think that it is. One time I was on an airplane and I was talking to a woman sitting beside me, and I forget what denomination she was, but we started talking about things, and she says, "You just have to have faith." And that really kind of got under my skin because I knew what she meant, but she was saying it in a different way. It was as if she was saying, if you stare at an apple long enough and you have a whole lot of faith, then God will change it to an orange. And that's just not the case. In fact, that's ridiculous. We do not believe that. Faith is not magic. Faith is the realization of what is hoped for. Faith is rooted in the hope of God, which means faith is rooted in that relationship that we have with God. To truly have the gift of faith, which it is a divine gift, one must have an intimacy with the divine, a connection with God himself, so that we know what we are to be hoping for. Now we must make a distinction. Faith is not the same thing as belief, although they're closely related. To have faith, one must believe. I think we could all agree on that. But it is possible to have belief, but to have no faith, which means that all our beliefs are contained in our faith. An example of this, kind of to break it down, is that beliefs are the articles which we claim to believe. And the faith is the totality of that, mixed with that intimacy that we have with God. An example of having belief and no faith can actually probably best be described, and I know this isn't necessarily the best thing to talk about, but it's the truth, by the devil worshippers. Those who believe in the evil one, and for whatever absurd reason want to worship him, if you will, they require a validly consecrated host, which means they must believe that Jesus Christ is present in the Eucharist so that they could desecrate it. They have belief, but they have no faith, obviously. They have no love or intimacy with the divine. In fact, rather, they have hatred. They believe so much that they believe in just enough to actually hate God. And you may think, well, that's kind of absurd. Does that really happen to people? And the answer is yes. And granted, there is a spectrum. And when we struggle with belief, and like I said, faith is a gift. It is bestowed upon us by the divine. And we must be willing to encounter the divine in our hearts. And as of this past week, there was a study that was released, and to be honest, I wasn't too terribly surprised, but it is rather sad that of Catholics under the age of 40, less than 25% actually believe in the true presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. Which means if we don't believe in the Eucharist and we don't have the belief, how then can we even possibly have faith? Now, I understand that the journey towards faith is in fact a journey and doesn't happen instantaneously, and it moves us, and we must be willing to grow in the faith. But at the same time, that is rather sad. And it almost makes me remember a story that was once told to me by a priest of an incident that happened probably about 60, 70 years ago. A long time ago, there was a priest who was about to celebrate Mass, and prior to Mass, some woman comes up to the communion rail. She faces the congregation of the church, and she says that there is no God. Given all the evil in the world, how could any of us ever possibly believe in God? She says that God did not exist and that we are fools to believe in God. And so the priest coming down the main aisle of the church greets her at the communion rail and says to her, "My young woman, I am so glad that you came to church today to profess to everyone how much you believe in God." And she said to him, "You fool, I came in here to do the exact opposite." And he said to her, "Well, what if I told you this? What if I told you that if I could go out into the main part of the city and I could pronounce on a pedestal how I don't believe in unicorns, how unicorns are an absurdity, and I spend all my effort telling everybody how much I don't believe in unicorns and how they shouldn't believe in them either. And I put every effort to go out into the public sphere to say that. What would you think of me?" She said to him, "I think you'd be crazy. In fact, they would be just to lock you up and put you away for saying something so ridiculous." And then he said, "Well, what makes me, what I'm saying, different than what you're saying?" And she said, "Well, I don't know. The reason why I'm crazy and you're not is because what I am professing to say isn't real doesn't actually exist. How could we have had prohibition laws if there wasn't something to prohibit? How can there be laws on cigarettes if we don't have cigarettes? And how can there be atheists if they don't have something to atheate?" And she said to him, "I hate you." And he said to her, "Aha, that is your answer. Atheism is not a belief system. It is not a doctrine. Atheism is a cry of wrath. It is a cry of hatred. The young girl had enough belief in God to take the time to come into the church to tell everyone how she didn't believe in him, when the reality is that she did, but she was mad at him. Our faith moves us to action, and it requires a divine grace. In the second reading, there was a couple of verses that were omitted, and verses 3, 4, and 5 of this 11th chapter to the Hebrews. And by it, it says a statement of faith. Then after each statement of faith, it goes to an action. And it kind of goes over the first part of Genesis. By faith, creation happened. By faith, Abel offered a sacrifice. By faith, Enoch was taken up. By faith, Noah warned about what was going to happen. And as the second reading started today, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place. Our faith moves us to action, but to be able to get to that action, it presumes that we have a certain intimacy, a certain love with the divine. And that is what is necessary for us to truly grasp on to the faith that is being told to us. Again, faith isn't magic. It isn't something that can happen instantaneously and that can change something at the point of a finger. Rather, as the letter to the Hebrews reminds us, faith is the realization of what is hoped for and evidence of things not yet seen. Yes, we can sit here and stand and proclaim all our beliefs, which we will do in just a moment when we say, I believe in one God. But the reason why we call that the profession of faith is that we take that series of beliefs in which we state, and we don't just believe them. They are strung together by a love, by an intimacy that is only given by God himself. And that summation of our beliefs with the glue that binds it together by the intimacy of God is what we call the faith, so that we may actually realize what we are hoping for. For the hope in which fills our hearts is the will of God. And ultimately, the gift of faith will bring us a sense of peace, no matter what happens in our life. No matter what trial or tribulation we must endure, if we have the gift of faith, it will grant us a sense of internal and eternal peace. This is our call to faith. This is our dignity. And may God grant us the grace to live up to it.